Om Tat Sat. Yellarigu Namaskara. Good evening, friends. It's a great pleasure and honor to be back here for the third series of talks on Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, or the Art Gallery of Memories, the 8-volume magnum opus of D.V. Gundappa. When I began reading once again these volumes to prepare for these lectures, the question came to mind, what is the purpose of these lecture series? Already 2 series have taken place in this very auditorium, and probably one more series to complete the entire volume of his work. I've covered the first 3 volumes and a little more than half of the 4th volume in the first 2 series. So the ultimate objective of this lecture series is to inspire you to go and read the books, preferably in the original Kannada, and become enriched and enlightened. While that may be the ultimate objective, there are other secondary objectives also which are very important. Maybe it inspires you to learn Kannada and then read the original works. It is worth learning Kannada just to read these volumes, if not many other things. And anybody who knows any Indian language fairly well, with a good amount of fluency, can easily pick up Kannada. Well, if you don't know Kannada, you want to read it in English, the translations are available. First it was published on Preksha, and now it has come out in book form. The 5th volume was released recently, and the other volumes will be coming out very soon. Now, sometimes people may not be able to read the entire thing, but they may be more interested in listening and gathering information by the audio medium. In that case, they can listen to the lectures and get a flavor of what the old Mysore looked like, who are the great, some of the great luminaries of that era, and some of the human values that we can learn from them. This is the next level. If you listen to the entire lectures, which will probably go into about 15 or 20 hours, which is also not easy. But my expectations are even lower. If somebody just walked in today and spent 15-20 minutes listening to one episode or one part of an episode, that also will give a glimpse into some beautiful value of the past, or some human value, or some sliver of the old Mysore socio-cultural milieu. Similarly, somebody is browsing through YouTube and they see the GPA lectures and they listen to a small segment, the same will be accomplished. So I think the idea is basically we're trying to give a flavor of what is contained in these volumes. Naturally, I can't cover everything. It is not a replacement for reading the book, because sometimes when I had some friends who were complaining that I left out something from this episode and left out something from another episode, it is not possible for me to cover everything, and naturally I'll be picking up few things that are of interest here and there. So really, I invite you to read these books, because that is where the true enjoyment and elevation lies. Now, there is something that I have to mention, which Nadoja Dr. S.R. Ramaswamy told me when I asked him, how come when DVG writes about these great personalities, he only has nice things to say? It feels like all the characters he talks about, they are so good, they are so kind, fantastic people, did they not have any flaws? And immediately SRR told me that the intention of DVG was to capture the best and the finest aspects of these people. No doubt that they had their own limitations, weaknesses, negative aspects, but DVG wanted to capture the best of the best for posterity. Now, there is a certain tendency in every generation to say, oh, the past was very good, now things have become very bad. You know, nostalgia is just not what it used to be, and things like that. And in the same discussion with SRR, he mentioned even Plato says that look at the youth of today, they are degenerated. So if this is the case, that every generation is saying that things are getting bad, then either it is like yesterday Dr. Prasad Bapat gave a beautiful lecture about how the universe is expanding and accelerating. So one theory is we should say that the world is becoming worse day by day, so it becomes so bad that it will have end in pralaya. Or the other explanation, which is probably the more reasonable explanation, is that every generation has a tendency to look at the past with a 2020 vision and say that it was very nice, but today things have degenerated. So given this nature of people, when we look back at the past and try to take the best from it, then we will be perpetuating some of these values. So that is the reason why a lot of these stories have the positive traits of these personalities. In the previous series, I had completed the episode on Bharat Ratna Sir M. Vishweshwaraya, and now we will resume from there. Sir M. Vishweshwaraya resigned from the post of the Diwan in 1918. His tenure otherwise would have continued, but he resigned because of the infamous Miller Committee report and the attempt to make it publicly available for people. Now, there was a lot of political movement in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka of today, that is the Madras Presidency and the old Mysore region, for what was called a non-Brahmin movement, or even you can call it an anti-Brahmin movement, which is probably more appropriate for what transpired in that period. So there was a Justice Party in the Madras Presidency, and there was a Prajamitra Mandali in the old Mysore region. So the idea was that non-Brahmins were not getting enough positions in the governmental machinery, and there must be some sort of reservations for these people. Now, Vishweshwaraya was against any sort of reservation for anybody. He was a person who was for merit. He was a person who was for competence. It did not matter what the background of the person was. If the person is competent, he or she should be selected. That was his mindset. He was not having any other lens from which he was looking at it. That you can see from his personality and the way he grew up and everything. His focus was on, the best person should get the job. So therefore, naturally, this was against his principles, and he stepped down. Also, by the time he was 57 or 58 years old, I think, in 1918, so he must have also thought it is time to retire, and he came out of the Diwanship. The person who took his place was Madur Kantaraj Ars. Now, Kantaraj Ars was related to the Queen Regent. He was the younger brother of the Queen Regent. He was from a Zamindar family. And right in the beginning of the essay, DVG hastens to add that it was not because of any filial connections that Kantaraj Ars got the post, but it was because of his competence. He was a big Zamindar and everything, but he had genuine interest for improvement of the life of the poor, and he got this post. Now, this Miller Committee report was prepared by one Sir Leslie Miller, and he tried to recommend the reservation for non-Brahmins. And Vishweshwaraya rejected. He said this is absolutely not right, and ultimately he resigned, as I said. But Kantaraj Ars came in 1918. He was very particular that this report must be published. And the Miller report was published, and recommendations were implemented by the government in Kantaraj Ars' tenure. When Kantaraj Ars became the Diwan, DVG was very critical of his rising to that position. And he wrote that when after Vishweshwaraya's term got over and Kantaraj Ars is in his place, he will not be able to do such a good job. And this is natural, because after somebody of Vishweshwaraya's standing has served in that position for 6 years, anybody who comes will be in a difficult position. It is very natural. After a batsman who has scored 100 or 200 runs and he is given out by wrong decision of umpire, the next batsman is in a very, very pitiable condition, because he has to prove himself so much. So naturally it was difficult, and DVG wrote this critique, and till the end Kantaraj Ars never encouraged DVG. D.V. Gundappa, at such a young age, he was friends with Diwans like Vishweshwaraya, with P.N. Krishnamurti, M.N. Krishna Rao, Mirza Ismail. All these people were close to him, but somehow he never could even break the ice with Kantaraj Ars. However, we should observe DVG's magnanimity. When talking about Kantarajars, he also says he was worthy of commendation in all other aspects apart from this Miller committee report. His speech and conduct and temperament, all of them were tending towards greatness. He was an admirer of Sanskrit. He was very gentle. He encouraged several people and so on. Here I must take a small deviation and say a few words about how the personality of a person has to be seen from multiple ways. At the level of, often our Ganesh sir talks about the three levels, Adhibhuta, Adhidhaiva, Adhyatma. So if you take this framework itself, at the level of Adhibhuta, the competence in a particular field, it could be art, it could be in governance, it could be in a sport, it could be anything. A person may be very competent in that level, maybe an extraordinary degree of excellence in a particular field. When it comes to Adhidaiva, which is a realm of belief, they may have an ideology which is totally different from what we have. So the competence in the level of Adhibhuta is different, and the ideological or doctrinal phase of theirs is very different. And Adhyatma, as a human being, a personality in the personal character is a totally different thing. So there could be a person who totally differs from us in ideology, who is completely incompetent, but a wonderful human being. Now, how do we, what is our reaction to such a person? Or somebody is an extraordinary singer or extraordinary dancer, but a total charlatan and rogue in a personal life. How do we deal with this situation? Somehow there is a tendency for us to think if he or she is very competent in a particular field, he also should be a nice person. He also should have an ideology that makes sense. But these three are not always the same. In a great person, they may align completely. But often and often, these three are different in its own place. Which is why we see all these personalities, and a wise, almost I can call him a modern day Rishi, DVG has got this ability to look at these things differently. Where he disagrees at the level of Adhibhuta, he writes in his, as a journalist, he has written, or in other places as an author, he has written, has recorded it, and he has shared it with his friends and disciples. But when the person is of very high caliber in individual, in the level of personal relation, he also mentioned, he speaks about that. When he disagrees with the ideology, he is very clear about it, but he does not allow that to affect the personal relation. He himself was there when the Prajamitra Mandali was created. In the very first meeting, DVG was present. In a non-Brahmin, anti-Brahmin movement, DVG was present. The Justice Party members were his friends, but he was totally opposed to their ideology. He wrote against it. But a person who was a political rival of his, Ramaswamy Mudaliar, came to his help when he asked for support Bengaluru Nagaratnamma by doing a kacheri. So in this sense, I think it is a very important way to see Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, and even in our daily life, that these three are different, and when we want to assess a personality, it is very important to take all these three, and when we don't have information about one of these three aspects, better not to comment on it. Now, just because a film actor says something absolutely unruly and illogical does not mean he is a bad actor, or does not mean he is a bad human being. So let us criticize what he has said and reserve our comments about his personal life, which we don't know about. So I think it's very difficult, and in today's world, I think it's even more important that we are aware of this, because of the tendency of people to become so polarized that if you don't agree with my political view or my religious view, then you cannot be my friend. This is the kind of situation. When we look at Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, cutting across all these differences, they are able to find a lot of common ground. Now, after and also Kantarajars, coming back to Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, he was not in good health, so he was for a very short time, for about 4 years, he was the Diwan. And following him was Raja Mantra Dhurina, A.R. Banerjee, Sir A.R. Banerjee. there is not much to be said about A.R. Banerjee. He was not, although he also served for 4 years, nothing noteworthy seemed to have occurred in his time, except, there's an interesting episode where DVG wanted to make an appeal to the government, and his friend warned him that if you write more than 2/3 of a page, then the divan will not see it. He was a very hasty man. He would just quickly run through it and get the things done. So if it was more than 2/3 of a page, I mean, if it is 2 pages, you have no hope. But even a full page is problematic. Whatever you want to say in 2/3 of the page, there must be space below that, and about 3, 4 or 5 fingers width space where he will make some, write a hukum or something, and that has to be okayed, and some other space for further notes and additions and things like that. So if you give a bigger thing, then the whole process will get delayed. So this was his nature of getting the work done. And although I think DVG has been very generous in speaking about Banerjee, it looks like he has not been of much impact in the larger scheme of things. Now we come to the next major Diwan of Mysore, Sir Mirza Ismail, who had fairly long tenure from 1926 almost till 1940-41 he served, quite a long tenure. And during his period there was a lot of development activity and also a lot of riots. So both these things are important, and we will come to that. Mirza Ismail was a friend of Nalvadi Krishnaja Wadiyar, and he was a 3rd generation friend. So his grandfather was Ali Asgar. Even today you have Ali Asgar Road in Bangalore. I'll come to that in a few minutes. So Ali Asgar was a horse trader. And just like how DVG writes, just like how today you have motor cars and buses and this kind of transportation, 100 years or 150 years back, horses were the most important means of transportation, and a horse trader is something like having a car showroom today. Like one of the car showrooms, if you have, you are an important guy. So he was importing horses from Arabia and other places, and he sold it to the British Army. Then he would sell it to the different kingdoms and so on. Then around 1850, the Maharaja of Mysore, who was at that time Mummudi Krishnaja Wadiyar, he took the help of Ali Asgar for some work, because he used to travel quite a bit, and he had faith in Ali Asgar, so he would send some of the missives and some information through him to other people. So he traveled to Bombay and Madras and other places. So he would carry some confidential letters from the Maharaja to other people. So therefore, there was a sort of friendship that developed between the two of them. And his son was Aga Jan, who was also a horse rider, and he was a friend of the Chamaraja Indra Wadiyar the 10th. They also would go horse riding together and so on. And his son Mirza Ismail and the Nalvadi Krishnaja Wadiyar were also classmates and friends. And when the Krishnaja Wadiyar IV was getting educated, during the early education, a royal school was created, because he cannot study alone. So they created a royal school, and some of the children of prominent citizens of Mysore were his classmates. So almost a special school, and the classmates were mainly because Maharaja was studying. So people like M.S. Ramachandra Rao and B. Venkata Subbarao and all these people who are classmates of the Maharaja. Then he later worked under the Maharaja, and he became what is called Huzur Secretary, which was a post that was created during this time. And Purna Raghavendra Rao was appointed, and then later Mirza Ismail became the Huzur Secretary. After this, he rose to the position of, initially he worked in a police department, and he finally became the Diwan. So I'm trying to focus more on some of the emotional episodes rather than the technical information, which you can easily get anywhere. Now, DVG writes there is a poem by a Farsi poet which kind of describes what Mirza's philosophy of life was. And the poem is, "You arrived here crying while your kinsman smiled. Depart from here smiling while your kinsmen cry. In fact, I think this has also been taken for a famous Rajesh Khanna song, Suffer. So this is the same sentiment. When you are born, you are crying, but all the people around you are happy because it's birth. And when you die, you are smiling. Or ideally, you should be smiling. And other people are crying because you have led a good life. Because if you didn't lead a good life, they would also be smiling. So that is the import. And he says, be good and do good. This is the motto of Mirza. But DVG doesn't stop there. He said, what is the meaning of this good? He says, be good and do good. It sounds very nice, right? That's a guiding principle. But what is good? Whatever the majority of the people demand, that is good. This is a particular view, one group of people. What has been accepted by the world as good from time immemorial is good. This is another point of view. And he says, Mirza was not a person to deny the opinions and aspirations of the people. Although he is a diwan, which is something equivalent of a chief minister, but it is not a democratic government. So he doesn't have to bend to the whims and fancies of the people. He can, if he chooses, to do whatever he wants. But he still valued the opinions and voices of the common people. Despite this, during the tenure of Mirza Ismail, there were a few unfortunate episodes which really halted the development work. So there was a lot of development which DVG talks about, but there are a few episodes that really tarnished his image and also halted the development work. One was the Binny Mills unrest. And that was not so notable because it did not have a communal flavor. It was just a group of laborers creating an unrest. But the next thing which happened in 1928 or 29, I think, was called the Ganapati Galabhe, the Sultanpet riots. Now, this is an episode that I think my friend Sandeep Balakrishna has written a detailed article on Dharma Dispatch about this, which I would invite you to read. And it was something which really shocked Bangalore. It is unfortunate that people of the city don't even know about it unless somebody has read few of these books. There is no mention in any of the major history textbooks about this. But this happened on Arcot Srinivasacharlu Street. There was an old building and which belonged to the municipality, and later I think the S.R. Nanjundaya school was set up there. And opposite that house was one Muhammad Abbas Khan Sahib. And there was a stone vigraha of Ganapati in that temple for a long time, and that was installed in front of the temple. And this created a lot of, it was kept somewhere else. This created a lot of problem, and then people like Veerakesari Sitarama Shastri and all these people, they wrote very strongly in the Veerakesari paper and said, how can this happen? You have put the Murti in some corner, and he writes as if Ganesha is lamenting about this, in the darkness and so on. So he says, oh no, how can I end up in this lurch? I am the deity of knowledge, education and so forth, but I have been made to suffer without puja and naivedya, and I am languishing in this darkness, all these things. So then, okay, the people were, oh fine, this is not the right thing to do. They brought it out and they established that they installed it, did Prana Pratisthapana, whatever, in front of the school, and that was facing this Abbas Khan Sahib's house. Now this led to a great problem. And there was a fight, some riot, and a lot of people were in loss of life and everything. At that point of time, DVG was in Bagalkot in a journalist conference. Mirza Ismail, who's a diwan, sends immediately a telegram to DVG informing that the situation is under control. Now, I want you to take a moment to think about this episode. D.V. Gundappa is a journalist, like any other. For a chief minister of a province to write a telegram to a journalist who is in some other place informing him that things are under control, we can somehow estimate what respect the DVG had in the political class. We very rarely get some things about him, because he was in fact very scared to write Art Gallery of Memories, because he said it would mean talking about myself. I don't want to do that. So he had in fact pushed writing this for a long time. And only much later in the 1950s he started writing, recollecting some of these episodes. But even there, sometimes in the truth we cannot hide for too long. Somewhere it will find its way to come and see us. So you can make out this sort of reverence that DVG had from even the highest person in the state. Then he comes back to Bangalore, and then by this time there certain developments take place, and he is given a certain version of the story, and for whatever reason he decides not to go and talk to Mirza Ismail about this, and this leads to a sort of coldness between the two, and that gets resolved much later, which I will come to. And then there was the another set of riots, Nariman riots and Vidurashvatva riots and all these things. After this Ganapati Galabe, what happened was a committee was established and a certain investigation was done, and therefore the people like Vishwesharaya was made the head of the committee, and Justice D.K. Ramarao and K.P. Puttanachetty, in whose name the town hall of Bangalore is there, and Manikyavelu Mudilayar. I think Manikyavelu is the same person whose Manikyavelu mansion, which now houses the NGMA. All these people were there, and there were people who testified as witnesses and so on. And finally, there was a report, and there was a criticism of the government, and Vishwesharaya signs the report and sends it to Mirza Ismail, who is the Diwan. And after the report was sent to Vishwesharaya, by Vishwesharaya to Mirza Ismail, as usual, as his usual routine, he went walking in the evening. He went to Mirza Ismail's house, which was also a usual thing he did. He entered the drawing hall of Mirza Ismail. He took his walking stick and pointed to a photograph and said, "That should go from here." And DVG says, some context is required, because in the drawing room of Vishwesharaya, in the drawing hall of Mirza Ismail, there were 4 photographs. One photograph was that of Firdausi, the Persian poet. The second photograph was Nalvadi Krishnaja Odayar, was the Maharaja. The third photograph, first there was Firdausi on the top, then below that there was his father, and there was a picture of Maharaja, his father, Aga Jan, and next to his father there was a picture of Sir M. Vishwesharaya. And Vishwesharaya points to his photograph, which is there. There is no place for this, remove it. And Mirza says, "Why do you say this? What's wrong with you?" And he says, "I sent you the report, didn't I? I don't think you are very happy on seeing this report. I assume that you are upset. I think that has no place here." Immediately, Mirza Ismail says, "You have the same place in my life as my father, and that will always be there next to my father's photograph." So that is his magnanimity. And we find in many places the kind of sharpness of DVG as a journalist is kind of softened when he writes Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, because here he's trying to bring out the best. So even when he's criticizing, even when he's saying something little difficult about somebody, he gives a certain covering. For example, he says, "We can believe without qualms that if not for the riots, the developmental works would have proceeded at a 2-fold pace." What does it mean? It means you could have had 100 things, you have 50, which is deplorable. But the way in which he presents it is, it would have been 2-fold if not for this. Just this unfortunate riots happened, otherwise it would have been 2-fold. So you can see that so much of softness in the way he presents the thing. And then he gives a list of all the development activities that were under Mirza's tenure, like the sugar factory in Mandya, the paper factory in Bhadravati, the establishment of Mysore Medical College, and a drive for cleanliness in rural areas, and so many things. He has given a huge list of things. Then a lot of industries opened during this time. And several instances, he talks about the personal quality of Mirza Ismail, the personal character and his compassion for people. So on the one hand, there is some sort of criticism, some critical evaluation of his tenure as a Diwan, but he does not want you to get an idea that this person was not up to the mark. The criticism is again and again there is like the goodness and the noble qualities of individuals come like a pallavi line in a kriti. Again and again you are reminded, just because he did something this is not so okay, don't think that he was not a good person, he had great qualities. So you see that although the structure seems a little strange for some readers, that abruptly we find in him talking about some of the noble qualities of these people. The reason is he does not want you to get a wrong impression, because his criticism is a holistic one and not just about one particular thing. Writing about the daily routine of Mirza Ismail, DVG says that he had 2 notebooks. This is very interesting. Mirza kept 2 notebooks. Every night he went through these 2 notebooks without fail. One notebook consisted of all the orders that he had given to the subordinates on that day. He went through those orders one by one, and he made a note of what has been executed and what remained to be done. And in case of pending orders, he would send repeated reminders. The second notebook consisted of things that required his personal attention. Someone's request, somebody's suggestion, somebody's opinion that he had heard or read, all these things came into a notebook. Now, this is so important for an administrator. It is very easy to say, okay, these are the list of activities, please take care of it and go away to do something else. Many times things don't get done. So after you have a meeting and you have the minutes of the meeting, which is very beautifully written, the next meeting, the first thing you have to do is look at the minutes of the previous meeting and see what has been accomplished, what has not been accomplished. And many times it doesn't happen. So this is a seemingly trivial thing, but it shows the meticulousness of a good administrator. And every night, Mirza would read all the important newspapers in circulation. He marked important articles using a blue pencil, and they would be cut and stored away in a separate register for that. And because he was so meticulous, he never forgot anything related to the welfare of the people. One way or the other, his mind was always occupied in the welfare of the state. DVG talks about his unbiased nature and how he used to face allegations despite his unbiased nature. Now, the Hindus would accuse him of supporting the Muslims. The Muslims would support him of accusing the Hindus. DVG says, in sum, I don't feel that Mirza unjustly favored Muslims. I can't say that he was deliberately unjust towards anyone, be it Muslims, Hindus, or Christians. He used a mixed policy when it came to distributing government contracts and subsidies. No community should feel left out. At the same time, nobody should get more than what he expects. If on one occasion certain group was given a contract, on another occasion a different group. If in one field there is a certain group as a beneficiary, in another field a different group should be. So overall there should be some notion of equality. This was his opinion. But the question that arises is this not another kind of a quota system? Is this dharma? Even today, this sort of policy is practiced in every sphere of our government and our public life. For example, a simple thing, if you want to take like the Padma Awards, or you take some Sahitya Academy Prashasti, or any of these things, the way it is done is, there is some value, of course, given to competence and merit. Yeah. So there is some, of course, they are not going to give it to a totally incompetent person, but they say, okay, we have a list of all these people, but there are too many people from Bengaluru. We need somebody from North Karnataka. We need somebody from coastal Karnataka. We need somebody from here. So instead of looking at only the merit of the person, we start looking at the region. Oh, but all the awardees seem to be from the same community. We have to give something for the other community. Okay, so then you bring in the element of community, caste, varna, these things. Then say, oh, but all the awardees are Hindus. We are a secular country, so we should have some other people. So therefore, instead of giving an award based on the merit of the person, you start taking into consideration things totally unrelated to that particular field. Whether it is dance or music or literature, it is immaterial who is producing it. We are only looking at the merit of the work. But this sort of tendency has crept in to the extent that today, if you don't do this, it is seen as being communal, it is seen as being hegemony and partial and fascist and whatever. You can use a lot of adjectives. So instead of going by dharma, you are going by something which is more like appeasement of different people. So you are basically, what happens, like DVG says, such a policy would invariably lead to the dissatisfaction of one group or the other. Now, of course, it is impossible for a judge to give a judgment which is favorable to both parties. However, it is very important to keep a larger dharma, because when justice has been served, keeping in mind dharma, then the generality of the population will accept it. Whereas if you are doing a Kazi Nyaya, that will not be sustainable. So even though we have mentioned in the beginning in discussion that DVG captures all the noble qualities, if you read the text carefully, in between you will find lot of critical observation of DVG. He may not make it very vachya, but if you are careful, you can observe what are the shortcomings of the different people. Similarly, when it came to matters like cow protection, when it came to the dealing with temples, so many places there were problem. And here, after when he talks about this, Mirza's policy, he doesn't mention the word dharma. He just talks about the policy. 4 or 5 paragraphs later, he says, one who adheres to dharma should be indifferent to both parties and conduct himself in an impartial manner. He's not addressing this to Mirza, he's not addressing to anybody. He's making a general statement. But samajdar ko ishara hi kafi hai. He must undertake that which will lead to the welfare of all people, adhering to his conscience. It is difficult for one to possess such a firm mind. If one doesn't have that fortitude, the accomplishment of justice becomes difficult. No person is named, nothing. It is just a general observation about society. Here again, he talks about how Mirza was totally opposed to the creation of Pakistan, and also later when Mirza goes to become the Diwan of Hyderabad, he is actually very disillusioned. He is lured to become the Diwan of Hyderabad because the Nizam says, you are a Muslim, you are so capable, this is a Muslim state, why not come and be a Diwan here? He was very happy being a Diwan of Mysore state, but he was very unhappy being the Diwan of Hyderabad. Similarly, there is a situation where there becomes, in the later part of the 1930s, a sort of discord is created between the Yuva Raja and Mirza Ismail. Now, Mirza Ismail, like I said, was a classmate and a very close friend of Nalvadi Krishna Raja Wadiyar. But the Yuva Raja also started gaining some power. And anybody who went and met the Yuva Raja and then met Mirza, there were a lot of suspicion. If somebody from Mirza's side went to just meet the Yuva Raja, there was a suspicion. Somebody from Mirza's side, Yuva Raja's side went to meet Mirza, there was suspicion. Once there was a situation where D.V. Gundappa was the president of the Kannada Sahitya Parishad. Vice president. So president was always the Yuva Raja. Honorary president. 1934-35, DVG was the vice president, and the Parishad would get a certain grant, which was not sufficient. Now, DVG wanted to meet the Yuva Raja and put a request saying that this money is, we need more money, and even the usual money of 2,000 rupees, which is supposed to come this year, has not come, so I want your help. So he takes an appointment, goes to meet the Yuva Raja, and the Yuva Raja said, why don't you just talk to Mirza Ismail, he will sort it out for you. But remember, 1928-29, the Ganapati Galabai had happened, and ever since there was a sort of coldness between Mirza and DVG. They were not really on talking terms. So DVG says, there is some disagreement between Mirza and me. Due to political reasons, he is angry with me. This is what he tells the Yuva Raja. The Yuva Raja laughed and said, that is okay, but this is a matter of public interest. You cannot allow your personal this thing to come in the way. So, you have to budge a little, show some humility. I will talk to Mirza. And so I hope I will see you tomorrow at the tea party that Mirza has organized. And DVG says, I have no idea about it. I am not invited. Immediately he takes the phone. He calls Mirza Ismail. puts it down. You have been invited, you should come. So then here he lands up at the, then he says, you have to come for this tea party. And when he wants to go out, he had entered the Yuvaraja's room through some southern staircase or whatever. He was trying to go out the way he came, and then one of the palace attendants said, "Sir, please, go from that side, because take the northern side staircase." He said, "But my footwear is there." No, it's already been transferred there. The reason is because somebody else is coming to meet the Yuvaraja, possibly BK Garudachar, and if he sees DVG with talking the Yuvaraja, that will create a lot of turmoil. So he will recognize the footwear. So therefore, it was quietly transferred other side. You please go that side. So this gives the idea of the sort of suspicion and intrigue and political turmoil at that period of time. So then what happens is, going back, he comes to the tea party and he is standing diffidently in the corner, and the Yuvaraja calls him and he says, he speaks to both of them and says, please, why are you doing this? You should give the grant. So then what happened was, he had already spoken to Mirza Ismail and it was sorted out. The grant was sanctioned. Then what happened, of course, was after this Nalvadi Krishnadeva Odiyar passed away, there was a lot of allegations, and this led to a sort of souring of relationship, and Mirza also stepped down, and he took retirement. And he also went to, I think first he went to the north to be in Jaisalmer and Jaipur to be the Diwan. And then later he came to Hyderabad, and because of this Razakar party and a lot of internal politics and the Nizam, he got fed up and he retired and he came back. In fact, Mirza had warned the Nizam that if you support the Razakar party, it will never yield anything good to the kingdom. And later, DVG says, I have also seen this warning communicated in writing to the Nizam. And when he realized that all his advice and everything is falling on deaf ears, he resigned and came. Yeah, but then he came and settled down in number 2 Ali Asgar Road. So I mentioned about Ali Asgar. So Ali Asgar, incidentally, was a friend of Mark Cubbon, Sir Mark Cubbon, after whom the Cubbon Park is named. So Mark Cubbon told Ali Asgar that there's so much of place in Bangalore, it's just lying empty. Why don't you build a house? Not like today. It was long back, about 150 years ago. Lot of place. He says, but where do I have land? He says, you just take the map and mark the land and consider it yours. Just you take the... So then the portion in today's, behind the Cunningham Road, that region, the entire what was called Arab lines, he marked that entire region, and that whole region belonged to Ali Asgar. And that's why you had the Ali Asgar Road. So then number 2 Ali Asgar Road was Mirza's official residence, which was, when DVG wrote this, he says it's more than a century old. So you can imagine, probably late 19th century. So he retired, he came away from Hyderabad, settled here. DVG writes, Mirza's house never looked like the abode of a retired person. Because if a retired, the moment an official retires and leaves his position, he is nobody. Nobody cares about him. When he is in power, he is everything, Indra, Chandra, Devendra. The moment he retires and goes to his house, he is one more citizen. Unless he gets some position as some, in some arbitration council, or he has got some special position. Otherwise, he is a normal citizen. Nobody will bother about him. But here, he says, it looked busier than an officer's place, full of activity, full of life. People would come and meet him from many parts of India. He had friends from all over the world. There will always be visitors. And whenever he would hardly have any free time, because he's always so many visitors, and whenever little bit time he would get, then he would read some of the great Persian poets like Firdausi and Hafiz and all these people. And he also traveled to Europe, he traveled to Persia to see his place of his ancestors. And then after that he came back from Europe. He was getting treated for some illness, but it was not very effective. Then he said for further treatment he may have to go to Bombay or Vienna or someplace. And DVG met him few days before Mirza died, and the night before his death, one of Mirza's friend called him and asked him, "How are you doing?" And Mirza said, "I'm getting ready." That was the answer. And the friend did not understand what he meant. So Mirza further clarified. He said, "I'm getting prepared for the trip." But of course, maybe the friend still thought he was preparing for the trip to Vienna or Bombay. But it is, of course, the eternal journey. You arrived here crying while your kinsman smiled. Depart from here smiling when your kinsmen cry. This was his favorite line. I will cut to the appendix where there's a small portion about Mirza and his friendly nature, where few of the things DVG talks about. His first meeting with Mirza Ismail was through Bellave Venkatnaranappa, who was Mirza's professor of physics when he was in college. And when he had gone to Mysore University, Naranappa spoke to Mirza Ismail and he said, there is this guy who writes in the Karnataka, his language is very good, do you happen to know him? And Venkatnaranappa said, "Yes, I know him very well. He's a friend of mine." And Mirza said, "I would like to meet him. I think he's a young guy. He writes very well in English. Please arrange for a visit." And then at that time, he's living in this place called Silver Oak Lodge, and DVG goes to meet him. And, they spend some time, and DVG writes, "I felt very happy after the meeting. We hardly discussed anything of importance. No politics. It was just casual talk, but the simplicity of his words, the friendly tone of his voice, the feeling of an existing intimacy, the light humor, all this evoked a sense of joy. And at that time, I never imagined that Mirza would become a diwan in 1915, much before." Yeah, he was a personal secretary. He was Huzur secretary to Maharaja at that time. And he gave some books to DVG also to read. And then DVG writes, "It became a regular practice for Mirza and me to write letters to one another once every fortnight or once in 20 days. And in those letters, we would have short discussions related to polity, history, religion, art, and so on. And over these years, this friendship blossomed. The sort of leisure and consistency of that time, we can really appreciate that. It is not that they are meeting regularly. It is not that they didn't have any great technology. Today we can be in touch with 25 people every day on WhatsApp. But despite that, do we have this sort of intimacy and this consistency? Maybe for a period of time we may send some messages. After that we are totally. Whereas here a regularity of this once in 15 days or once in 20 days or meeting every time you go to a particular town, you make a note of meeting. This sort of friendship has so much more value. In fact, one of the things I have always felt, there are so many study circles that Ganesh sir has started, and through the course of the study circle, whether we learn anything or not is secondary, but the fact that we are regularly meeting our friends without any, otherwise if we don't have this framework, what is the reason to go and just land up at somebody's house, especially if they are in a different part of town? If you are in the same neighborhood or you are 5 minutes away, then you may just, in the night when you are going for a walk, you may just show up at their place and say hello. But if you are in a totally different part of town, there is no reason to show up unless you are invited or there is some particular event or gathering. But because of these study groups, what has happened is the friendships have strengthened. We may have somehow learned few things because of, there is no other way. If you repeat it 10 times, you cannot but learn some things. But the more important thing is these friendships develop. I think if we are really, we find that we are having some sort of commonality with a group of people, it is very useful to create some framework. Those days there was letter writing and visiting on certain occasions. But today, although we have all the technology, it may not be possible. So creating some means in which to have a sustained conversation about different things and enrich one another. I think that when we read these episodes, we feel it's so nice that they could do this. There was this conflict between DVG and Mirza, as I said. Now this conflict was there, they had a friendship of about 45 years from 1915 till Mirza's death. But through this conflict, through this friendship, there were also patches of conflict. And when this conflict happened, and it initially when there is some misunderstanding, it's a small thing. But over a period of time, this gets into this kind of downward negative spiral. And what would have been a simple thing which could have been just sorted out by one phone call or one nice shouting match with that person, and all the tempers are calmed in one session, when that is not expressed and it is kept within a small group, or your group of sycophants are doing jalra and saying, oh, this guy did this, and this becomes so much bigger. And it requires a great person to come and break that and bring the two people again. That is what V.S. Srinivasa Shastri did. When he came to Bangalore, he came to know about the all the riots and everything. He also came to know about the misunderstanding between Mirza and DVG. It was Shastri's 60th birth anniversary, and he came from Chennai, from Madras at the time, to Bangalore to celebrate. And then there was a dinner party arranged in Century Club. So although it is his 60th birthday, he gives a small pointed speech mainly to DVG so that he can patch up with Mirza. So a great person who has got a bigger vision, even though it is a personal occasion, he has every opportunity to feel happy and say, oh, I am turned 60, I have done all these great accomplishments, all of you are there, my great friend. He could have also said that, but he took this opportunity, he didn't waste it, he took it to pinpoint an aspect of a personal problem of a friend. At the same time, it is also in general about friendship. So he says, in this world, friendship is a big thing. In human relationships, because of some reason, friendships get hurt. Politics is like a sword. It cuts everything, whatever comes into its contact. Bosom friends lose their friendship either due to misunderstandings, anger, rashness, obstinacy, or some other reasons. And so on. He goes on to talk about friendship but the main idea is to tell DVG to patch up with Mirza. And finally, when returning from the club, he tells DVG, what say, did you feel that my words were inappropriate? And then DVG understood, and then some of the bitterness also went down. And he also, in one of the family functions, he makes them hold the hand and says, you should get rid of these differences. So whatever, like yesterday, Bapat said so nicely, even a mistake of a genius is something very valuable. A person, even when two noble people have a fight, something good comes out of it. This is probably a sort of corollary to what he said. And finally, there's one episode I will like to share about Mirza before going to the next Diwan. In 1938, there was a committee that was established by the Mirza government to recommend a suitable form of government for Mysore. And K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar was the chairman of the committee, and all these people were there. And DVG was a person who was for the responsible government. He wanted to have democracy. He wanted to have independent governance. So he wrote his opinion. He even added an appendix, and he said the objective of a responsible government is something that he supports. And Mirza was greatly displeased with the suggestion that he offered, and DVG's suggestions was not considered at all. The day DVG signs the report, he was unwell, and it was diagnosed as typhoid the very next day. And he was admitted to Victoria Hospital. He was unconscious. From the time Mirza came to know, every morning he was the first visitor to Victoria Hospital. Even earlier, in one of the situations when DVG was really unwell, it was Mirza who came and sat next to him and forced him to have a cup of milk and ensured that he gets better. And even here, that he would always come on horseback. He would ask after DVG's health, and until DVG got back home, every single day he would come and inquire after him. Now, the political differences and other things are one side, but the personal relationship should not be spoiled. And when finally the dream of DVG was fulfilled and Maharaja Jaichamarajendra Wadiyar announced the responsible government, that was the day in which he was announcing it, a car comes to DVG's house from Mirza's house. And he says, you are requested to come. And even before DVG can get down from the car enters Mirza's house and the door opens. Even before DVG can get off, the Mirza says, "You must be the happiest man today because see what's happening." DVG is like, what's the occasion? Can't you hear in the radio what Maharaja is saying? You have been dreaming for a responsible government. It has been so many years of your tapas. Finally, it is fulfilled. And Mirza is a person who has opposed it tooth and nail. And he is so magnanimous in saying, now you must be a happy man. And DVG says, those words appear in front of me almost every day and every second, even to this day. So like I said, when we look at it from these different lenses of the competence as an individual, the ideology of the person, and the personal nature, these are three different things. Sometimes I feel in the case of people like Mirza Ismail, the ideological and the sectarian views of the religion can sometimes, especially if it's religion which is of, which is propagating religious imperialism, sometimes even though a patriotic and a well-meaning person can get clouded by it. And when that can happen to somebody of the stature of and caliber of Mirza Ismail, it can happen to anybody. This is a sort of warning I feel when I go through some of these episodes. Now, after Mirza Ismail, the next person who comes in the series is M.N. Krishna Rao. M.N. Krishna Rao was not a full-fledged Diwan. He was an acting Diwan on two different occasions. I think once when Mirza goes to the round table conference, and I think in the end, before the shift to the responsible government, he was there. But nevertheless, he was a very important figure and also well known to D.V. Gundappa. Incidentally, M.N. Krishna Rao is the younger brother of Professor M. Hiriyanna, who is the renowned Sanskritist and philosopher. According to one set of friends, the M and N in M.N. Krishna Rao stood for Madi and Niyama, in the sense orthodoxy or purity and conservatism, discipline, and Niyama, which is rule, principle, tenet, justice. And this kind of hints at his nature. It was not at all possible for anybody to become very friendly or have some intimacy with Krishna Rao. He was very stern. But he was always for truth, he was always for justice. He wanted to be appropriate everywhere. He never gave anything 1 rupee more or 1 rupee less. That was his principle. He came to know M.N. Krishna Rao in 1909 or 1910. And over the years, they became good friends, and Hiriyanna also was known to them. There was a point of time in 1924 when D.V. Gundappa had to travel to Delhi for a few months. There was the treaties and covenants between the princely states and the government of India. All these things, there were some discussion, and he wanted to gain an understanding of these matters, so he wanted to go to Delhi. Now, he knew that Sitaramaya, who was a brother of Hiriyanna and M.N. Krishna Rao, was living in Delhi. And so he said, okay, maybe I should also go and meet N. Sitaramaya, because he's also a very learned person. So he could take his help. But he did not know the address in Delhi. So he went to M.N. Krishna Rao's house one evening when he was to find out this. And then somebody told him he's gone for a walk. He's probably in Lal Bagh, his boss has come from Mysore, so he's probably, elder brother has come, and he's gone for a walk. Then he said, come back. So he also went for a walk, and then again came back and said, I want to meet him, but he was not yet there. So DVG writes a note saying, please give it to him when he comes back. And maybe I will come later or something. DVG goes back. He was living in Shankarpuram those days, and he comes back and he just started eating his dinner. And he did not have any electric lights or anything at that time. It's a small lamp was there. He was eating his food. Suddenly, he had two visitors, Professor M. Hiriyanna and M.N. Krishna Rao. So it's kind of embarrassing. He's in the middle of his dinner, and there is no light, and he requests them to sit down. And then after that, he finishes his dinner and gets the address, some Ipsetson Circle, Paharganj, something. DVG says, I don't remember, and I'm sure DVG remembered. He's just given some part of it. Some people have Spashta Nenapu, some people have Aspashta Nenapu. DVG clearly had a Spashta Nenapu, but he has written some detail. And they start discussing about the Aporushayatva of the Veda and the detailed discussion of Mimamsa and so on. And finally, he gets the address and he says, okay, I will go and meet Sitaramaya. I want to consult him on some things. Then what happens is after a week or 10 days, whenever he was slated to leave, DVG lands up in the Delhi railway station. And he sees N. Sitaramaya waiting to receive him at the railway station. He says, how did you know about my arrival? I never imagined. I wanted to come and visit. So you are trying to go and visit somebody in their house. They are waiting outside the railway station for you. Yeah, I have got it by some means. You have arrived, have you not? Then he says, but why did you come here? He said, because to escort you. But I was thinking of some other arrangements and everything. All those arrangements can be kept aside. Please accept this arrangement. I have been ordered to take you. That's all. And here it is not staying there for 1 day or 2 days. 3 months. 3 months he hosted D.V. Gundappa. And, or whatever, 2.5 months. And every time he said, sir, but expenses, something, all that will be settled in Bengaluru. I have been ordered. I have to follow it. And you have to please cooperate with me. This is what Sitaramaya said. And he spent a lot of time. DVG has not traveled much outside of Bangalore actually, except for Bangalore, Mysore, and maybe Madras here and there. Except these things, from his writings and even from what SRR has told us, hardly he has gone out of the south. Maybe 1 or 2 times he might have gone, and definitely he has not gone outside of India. This was probably the only time he went to Delhi. And there he travelled from Delhi to Ujjaini, he holding Kalidasa's Meghadutam and reading out passages and travelling to the Mahakal Devalaya and to Kurukshetra and all these places, Thaneshwar and places like that. So a casual request to meet somebody, and he is hosted there for 2.5 months. So that is the sort of intimacy and friendship and hospitality of that era we see. And M.N. Krishna Rao would have probably given these instructions to his brother, which is probably why he has mentioned it here. Time and again, when talking about different personalities, DVG has this habit of breaking it down into 3 things or 5 things that you can see in this person. When M.N. Krishna Rao had the role of acting Diwan, when Mirza went to the roundtable conference, around that time DVG is little hesitant to meet him because he has got the responsibility of a counselor, which he was, and also that of Diwan. So he said he must be busy, so he didn't go to meet Krishna Rao during that time. Once when going for a walk, Krishna Rao says, what is this, man? I have not seen you in a long time. And DVG says, sir, but you are really busy. You are a counselor. You are a diwan. No, it's not a problem. I mean, it's totally fine. But you may have to go to the circuit. You may have to travel. Well, there are so many people who will do that work, and it's not such a big deal. But your daily load, it won't it double because you're counselor and diwan. And then Krishna Rao says, our government was not formed today. It has a foundation of 100 years. Rules and regulations have naturally evolved. There are no defects in that part. To implement those laws, there are responsible officers who earn 1,000 to 1,500 rupees. If they don't do their work, there is nothing the government can do. And if they do their work, then government need not do anything much. So therefore, once in a month or once in 2 months, some difficult question may crop up, which then the minister has to solve. So the main job is to ensure the various officers are doing their job and following the rules and regulation, and then it becomes very easy. Here DVG says, it's actually not so straightforward, but there is a reason why Krishna Rao thinks it is so straightforward. 3 reasons: experience, intellect, integrity. he started working in the finance department, and finance department is one where all the departments information are collected. So therefore he had an idea of all the functionings of departments. So therefore Krishna Rao thought that it's not such a big deal. Second is he was naturally sharp. He would understand very quickly the essence of things, and his way of thinking was by nature very methodical. What was very difficult for others was effortless for him. So it is intellect. Third is integrity. He would completely listen to his conscience and not pay attention to anything else. He would not give way to any scheme or trick or cunning or anything. He was completely faithful to his duty. So this is the reason why he was able to view this very lightly. He did not think of it as a burden. When we read these, some many places all through the Jnapaka-chitra-shaale, you find 3 things, 5 things. It seems very attractive and it's so easy for us to understand. But it is the essence of that person. Although it seems like, oh, there are just these 3 things, it would be a result of a comprehensive understanding of that personality that DVG would have done. Here, there is an interesting episode of when M.N. Krishna Rao shifts from being the counselor, from the financial secretary, becomes the counselor, and then he's put in charge of the restoration of the iron and steel factory. Then, during this time, there are some head of accounts has raised all the so this is when he shifts from the finance secretary to the counselor. This episode happens. There is a lot of objections raised and sent to Krishna Rao. And M.N. Krishna Rao says, but you have raised all these so many objections. And this head of account says, these are all based on the objections that you had raised earlier, sir. And Krishna Rao smiles and says, the situation has changed. You see, earlier I used to look after only the financial responsibility, and that was the view of just one department. Now I have to look at the welfare of the entire factory. So my perspective is altered. So therefore, you have to see from my point of view now, because salt merchant can say that there is nothing equivalent in the world as compared to salt, but a cook cannot say that. For him, salt is also important, spice is also important, sugar also is important. So the altered perspective, he is so honest to his position that when he is there, he is looking at it from the appropriate perspective. And it can be said that Krishna Rao was a person who restored the Bhadravati factory, iron and steel works, and when there was a lot of opposition, he gave a very strong speech on why the future of the factory is going to be bright. He says, if there is a war, God forbid, in Europe, it is the Bhadravati iron and steel work which is going to support it because of production of steel, and his words turn out to be prophetic. DVG then talks about his personal qualities, his generosity, and his erudition, and so on. There is one episode that stands out here. Initially, I said that M.N. Krishna, some of his friends used to make fun of him by saying M&N stands for Madi and Niyama. However, there was one bill which on the Workmen's Compensation Act, which came in front of the Legislative Council. In factories, in an environment where somebody, either due to the wrongful act of the management or any other reason, if the worker gets injured or dies, then the heirs of the injured person or the person who has died will be eligible to get some sort of financial compensation. Then there was a question that it is only the right of the injured worker's wife and children who are given the compensation. If he has a mistress or a concubine, and if that mistress has children, will they be eligible for this portion of compensation or not? Because this is also common. In fact, even today, so many times, one of my friends, Vikram, who is a lawyer, he says when some of these kind of cases comes, first question he asks them is, "Eshtu maduve agide?" And many times it will be 2. So even today this is common. Although you can say the bigamy is it's punishable by law and so on, even today this is a reality. So at this point of time, Navaratna Ramarao and DVG, both of them are little worried because he is so orthodox and traditional, and when things like mistress and things come, we don't know what he will say. And Krishna Rao himself clearly stated that the compensation amount will be owed to all those who had the person's love and affection, which shows the sort of generosity that Krishna Rao had. At a personal level, he may have followed whatever orthodox practices or he may have certain views, but when it comes to justice and dharma, so not just Madi but also Niyama, both these things are there in M.N. Krishna Rao. After M.N. Krishna Rao, there is a large chapter called Mysore after 1940, where DVG talks about the developments in a succinct way. He doesn't talk about the later divans in so much of detail, because right at the start, he had taken a period of 60 years, which is a Samvatsara Chakra in our tradition, starting from 1880 all the way to 1940. And the historical events after 1940 is not so much interesting to him. He says it is not relevant to my present purpose here because I am trying to put a picture of old Mysore. But he still has a crisp narration of some of the episodes after 1940. He writes, in the year 1940, this, just to give you a context, by this time DVG was about 53 years old, I think. He was born in 1887, so he must have been around 53. And he says, my contact with public organizations such as the Legislative Assembly came to an end. Thereafter, there was no direct communication between me and the government. Since then, I have been merely a witness from afar. So he is looking at this from a Sakshi Bhava from 1940 onwards. Then he talks a little bit about Jnapati Madhava Rao and the downfall of public decorum. Here there is we see DVG's clarity of thought. And Madhava Rao, Jnapati Madhava Rao, a different Madhava Rao, talks to him, and the first question he asks DVG is, how do we make our people follow the assembly, the legislative assembly's decorum? The decorum has fallen down. And DVG says, sir, it appears that the time to teach decorum has passed. Our people had inherited the practice of reverence and dignity as a samskara for thousands of years. Due to this samskara, our people developed respect for the government quite naturally. People respected government authorities for some reasons. The first reason was decorum, the second was their adherence to truth, and the third was their scholarship. You cannot even imagine using these words today with any public, like a politician or a government authority. The people who assumed authority were well known for their conduct, integrity, education, intelligence. Due to those traits, people willingly revered them. Now that treasure trove of qualities has turned deficient. You are well aware of the people who have gained power in the state. Fearing such powerful people, if the government starts promoting them indiscriminately, how will citizens who know their real worth show respect to them? This is the situation today. Realizing the fact that there is no choice but to take shelter under random, unworthy individuals, the people merely show as much respect to them as is necessary, in a superficial manner. These days, the work of government has become particularly difficult. Can you believe that this was written in the 1960s? Does it not read as if it was written this morning? It is so prophetic. So many times when you read these passages, especially in the last part of the 4th volume, you feel it is from a very prudent political commentator writing today. That is and we are separated from him by 50 more years, 50 plus years. So after 50 years, a political comment is relevant is actually a very, very scary thing. And he talks about the helplessness of the government, the sort of change that has happened. DVG was a proponent of responsible government. In one of the places, he defines what is the meaning of a responsible government or an answerable government. The country should be ruled by the citizens. However, lakhs of people cannot rule at the same time. Therefore, they will elect their representatives. These representatives convene an assembly called the Legislative Assembly or Parliament. And then these people will, whoever come to the Parliament, they are representing so many people and trying to have their interests. Then DVG realizes that the responsible government was extremely new kind of system for our people and we have not understood it. In fact, the heading itself he gives is unnatural system of governance for this section. He says Indian leaders embrace this unnatural alien system without examining it thoroughly and without any basis in experience. They had to choose some sort of system at the end of the day, and in that situation, they picked the system of democracy. A foreign sentiment which is alien to the people was approved for this state by a few leaders. They came forward as though they were the only representatives of the state, and as if their words stood for the whole citizenry. They agreed to Delhi's terms, and according to their instructions, they indexed Mysore. And then DVG says, I was one of their followers. DVG was for responsible government. Despite his, what Mirza calls as so many years of tapas for getting responsible government, in this section he critically reviews it. He says, the system of responsible government came to Mysore unnaturally. It came from outside. It didn't grow from within us. Since it was too alien, we have not understood its character and nature. And then as is with DVG, always, even in a most complicated situation, he will bring in some light humor and some beautiful analogies. He says it is difficult for something that is not ours to suit us. How would we look if we wore the coat and turban of some random wealthy fellow just because somebody said they look regal? How will it be if the giant shirt tailored for some Bhimasena is worn by somebody thin and weak? How will it be if Hidimba's turban is worn by Hanumaya? Such is our plight. He then says, we wanted the rule of the people. What we got instead is a rule of the parties. ಬೇಕಿದ್ದು ಪ್ರಜಾರಾಜ್ಯ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದು ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ರಾಜ್ಯ. This peculiar form of democracy that we have is problematic, and in the epilogue, which has the fundamental principles of a state's well-being, this epilogue is it can be a standalone article in any political science textbook in the world. It is so beautifully written, starting from Rashtramva Ashwamedha from the Yajurveda, all the way to the Mysore state and the condition of the political situation in 1969 when he wrote this. He charts it so beautifully. Just as an individual piece itself, this is a wonderful education just to read this. He reminisces the times when he was fighting for responsible government. People used to ask at that time, what is the problem now? What is the lacuna? What are the facets in which the state is failing now? What corrections need to be done that will satisfy you? And this was a question that he did not have an answer. He says, when people pose such questions, at least I used to feel a lump in my throat. Should we complain that taxes are high? And DVG was a person who knew the workings of all the princely states, and he was so widely read. Heart of heart, he knew that the Mysore Samsthanam was actually very good. He writes, ignoring some of the small shortcomings, the larger picture was observed. The Mysore state of those days wasn't in any way lesser than any kingdom in British India. Rather, in many aspects, it was advanced and used to be a guiding light for others. And these were the things we had felt in our hearts to have been true. Although they were agitating for the sake of agitating perhaps, or in the mood of agitation which was prevalent in the nation, the fact of the matter is that things were not so bad in the Mysore state. Another important thing that DVG talks about is that there were well-wishers in those days with no affiliation to any political party, but concerned solely for the state's well-being. One such exemplar, he says, was Puttana Shetty, whose name I said is given to the town hall of Bangalore. There were many lawyers from those times. In today's day and age, this is 1969, if at all such remarkable and unbiased public personalities exist among us, I believe that their number will be no more than the fingers on one's hand. So this is in 1969, he says. And today the situation is no different. Because the moment there is a socio-political or political commentator, they are forced and they are forcibly drawn to take the side of some political party. A non-partisan political commentator is very, very hard to see today. Thinking about those years, DVG talks about the rebellion and fight for responsible government almost as though that people at that time wanted to rebel. There was a sort of delight in rebellion. And after rebelling and finally getting independence in 1947, he says the wisdom laid out above is a conclusion derived after some 20 complete years of practical experience. I have now come to realize how mutually distant the bookish lines and the real world experience are. So a system of governance that was so attractive on paper, when it came to reality, it became so disgusting. So the people who had this great vision that on paper, they were the one who were deceived. And deceived by what? Their obstinacy. See the self-critical view of D.V. Gundappa. He is ready to accept that it was obstinacy. You can say, I didn't have information. Actually, I was misled by some people. I could have, if I had known that, I would have been correct. He is saying, I was obstinate. It requires a lot of self-awareness to say, yes, I was obstinate. I was foolish. I was cruel. These are not very easy to say. To say that, oh, I would have, if I had known that, I would have done it differently. That's very easy to say. But to accept that I was obstinate is very difficult. Around then, we had not imagined how much the nature of an individual could stoop when power and wealth are offered to him. And our excitement made us forget the most natural of human weaknesses. We see similar thing, just as an aside I should mention, that during the 1990s, when the Indian economy was liberalized, there was a privatization, globalization, liberalization. There are a lot of people who vociferously objected and wrote against it. But in the 30 years that, 20 years that followed, 25 years that followed, lot of positive changes also happened because of the liberalization of the economy. And the people who are sensible at that time accepted that, yes, we had estimated something very different when we wrote those critiques. But not everybody has that kind of awareness to accept their mistakes. DVG says, in the year 1969 AD, now the question that can be, the question can be answered with clarity. What is the question? Haven't several countries achieved growth through democracy? This is a question, we can answer it. No country with democracy has ever achieved eminence. This is what DVG says. And as recently as a few months back, I saw a video. This was happening in a conference on democracy. A person, one of the political scientists, was saying that the most violence in the 20th century have come from democratic countries, and he was democratically asked to stop by the panelists. He was not allowed to speak. There was complete curb on what he was not allowed to finish what he was saying. He was trying to say that the maximum amount of damage done was by the so-called democracies like UK and US and Germany, all these places. It was not a monarchy. It was more in democracy. All this has happened. So he was asked to stop saying something which was not acceptable to them. But this is true because many of the times when there is a lot of voices. So in a sense, if you take the well-known saying, too many cooks spoil the broth, that applies to democracy perfectly. So there are too many cooks and it will always spoil the broth. So that it's not possible beyond a point to accomplish in democracy. It is, when we think about it today, we are living in a democracy and we are reaping the benefits and we are being ungrateful to democracy, people may say. But an honest assessment, although it is not popular, will definitely lead to some of the major loopholes in the present democratic system, which I think every citizen should cogitate upon for the future. However, when we see growth, it happens despite democracy because of the innate sense of industriousness in people and resources that are naturally available. These are two things that DVG has identified. Wealth and prosperity can be made by these industriousness and natural resources. However, has the comfort of the people, has the quality of life improved? This is something we have to keep questioning. Irrespective of the country, the political system should be aligned to the basic nature of the culture. Now, some societies are such that they are more aligned to spirituality, like India. More than iha, para is important for us. More than worldly existence, we have visualized the hereafter as more important. So therefore, worldly existence is a mere vehicle to get to a higher plane in our conception. Whereas in a Western world, especially in Europe and the United States, it is about living for today. There is only one life. We have to make maximum use of it. You live only once. This is their approach to living. So the material becomes more important than spiritual. So this is a basic difference between the cultures, and therefore the nature of governance should also be aligned to the people for it to fit naturally. This is a very deep understanding of the relationship between society and politics. However, a lot of people don't realize this, and once something has got into the mechanism of the government mechanism, it's very difficult to change it. Now, if somebody says, oh, democracy is actually not a very good idea, let us change it and do something else, it is almost impossible to do it, unless there is a violent revolution, which is not a very useful thing also for the people. At the same time, one should not think that just because there is a monarchy, that it is completely running on the whims and fancies of the ruler. Even in a monarchy, even in a dictatorship or in a single rule, the opinion of the people is very important. In our own history, we have so many examples where if he is a useless king, he is kicked out by the people. So it is important for the king, or even if it is a king, even though he has complete authority, it is very important for him to take the opinions of the people and to ensure that people are happy. Once the people are happy, he has nothing to worry about. And if the people are not happy, he cannot sustain for too long. Of course, then DVG talks about some of the accomplishments of the Mysore state, and then he divides the different divans into administrators and statesmen. And of course earlier we have discussed about the difference between administrators and statesmen. He identifies Divan Rangacharlo, Sheshadri Iyer, Sir M. Vishweshwaraya and Sir Mirza Ismail as the four people who were statesmen. And the other six he has talked about, Tambu Chetty, P.N. Krishnamurthy, V.P. Madhavrao, Anand Rao, A.R. Banerjee and Kantarajars, they achieved eminence as administrators. And he talks about how each of them, Rangacharlo, what he did, and Sheshadri Iyer, Vishweshwaraya, Mirza Ismail, all their accomplishments, and the problems of competitive politics, and how vote is the only element central to politics today. And of course, the rest of this discussion is actually very, very detailed service. If you are anyhow connected to policy making, this is a very, very useful book, and definitely for writers and historians and political commentators, this is a fantastic manual in a sense, because it is not just theory. There is first practical episodes from the lives of all these divans who are exemplars in their chosen field. And after looking at that, there is a contrast given with the post-independence period of Mysore in a very, very nice essay called Swatantravo Atantravo. Is it freedom or is it anarchy? He wrote this in 1970, I think, for one of the newspapers. It's a very sharp piece, and it talks about the contrast between the divans of that period and the later period. So in a sense, the theory and practice both are very beautifully captured in this book. And anyone who's interested to know more about that period, anyone who's interested to work on policy or governance and so on now will benefit from this volume. Tomorrow I will start the 5th volume, which is the Vaidika Dharma Sampradayasturu. Thank you so much for your time. Yes, sir.
What Ganesh sir is this thing referring to Jnapaka-chitra-shaale. Is there any difference between this English version? I don't think so.
Okay, there's a Ganesh sir has been giving a series of lectures on Jnapaka-chitra-shaale in Kannada. This can be seen as the first standard version. His can be seen as the PhD version. But basically, he's talking about these episodes to an audience in Kannada who have probably already read the works. So therefore, there is so much more of detail he's adding from his research on various people. Whereas my objective is far more humble. I'm trying to give a flavor of this book to readers who have no idea about it. So therefore, this is a simple version that's a little more elaborate, and also he's spending more time with each of the personalities and giving a lot of cross references from other works which he's studying. Yeah, so this has been translated first time into English, and it will be great if somebody can translate to other Indian languages as well. It will be more enriching because the English can only capture some part of the emotion. If it gets translated into languages like Telugu and Marathi, people will go mad. They will love it. If somebody can do it, it will be a great gift that you can give the people. So, thank you very much.